First and foremost, a very warm welcome. And on behalf of Zubair SEC, it's an extraordinary day having you on board, sharing your insight on various things. The purpose and intent of wanting to talk and meet with you and, in a sense, pick your brains, if you like. COVID has come in and created quite a lot of disruption in a variety of ways. And part of Zubair SEC's search has been to try and get a better understanding of the impact of this whole process and the pandemic on SMEs. And we understand that from a range of our own members, talking to external audiences, that the impact on SMEs has been quite serious. Many have had lockdowns, many of them are closure. But arising out of this are two major concerns. One concern is that the impact on SMEs could have long-term implications in terms of maybe future SMEs getting discouraged. And in doing so, this could also have an impact on the sector per se. With this huge impact of COVID, it looks like the SME sector is under a cloud. So the issue that we are trying to understand, and perhaps we'd like to have you share your insight, is how do you see going forward from the SME perspective, the possibilities of a recovery, and if so, what kind of recovery do you expect that could take place?
Okay, so good afternoon. Thank you very much, Nauzer, for having me. And it's always a pleasure, more than happy to contribute with whatever little I can share in terms of my so-called knowledge or my understanding of the current situation. I hope that my knowledge and my understanding is the same and echoes the ones of the other intelligentsia and the academics. So just to give you my perspective, the COVID has definitely disrupted the complete ecosystem of the enterprise, and I'm particularly talking on with the perspective of the small and medium enterprise. And what is small and medium enterprise in majority of the developed world is completely different over here. We refer what we call SMEs over here, and what refer to SMEs over here is actually a micro enterprise. We are a 1+5, 1+10 at the max. They're not really large, small units. So this enterprise, which was supposed to have been flourishing and supposed to have been not really erupting but blooming in this new so-called environment, has really taken a massive hit, and as has the rest of the industry. The shutdown was number one. Number two came on the lack of spending by government. And you must understand that SMEs do not survive because there is a requirement for SMEs thing. SMEs are an ancillary industry, a service provider to a major cluster. In Oman, we had a lack of that culture of a large cluster on which the SMEs kind of thrived on. So, in order for it's like saying that for a coral reef to survive, it needs an ecosystem on which this corals will grow around. The SMEs are like those little coral that they will only survive and they will only flourish if there is an ecosystem which is providing them the so-called feed to kind of grow on. Now, this very ecosystem has been hit badly. And by virtue of this, the so-called feed into this ancillary industry or the SME industry is virtually petered down, and it's slowing down, and it will slow down. And they will be hit on 2 or 3 fronts. One is a lot of SMEs over here have the tendency to take on large fixed overheads or ongoing fixed overheads. One is rent, because they're not in a position to have their own properties or working from home or working from garages. You must understand, in the West, a lot of people work out of their own premises or out of their own garages and out of their own blocks. I mean, the largest companies came out of backyard garages, and we know the stories. In Oman, we tend to go into an office space or a retail space or a retail front and take on these positions. And I think that is one thing that is got. They've got very high fixed expenses. Number two, we have a tendency to go and buy cars. In Oman, it's very difficult to kind of go and say vehicles or assets which are actually utilized assets, but they're not productive assets. You know, it's necessary assets, but not productive assets. So you need logistics, but there is no way that these young entrepreneurs have said, you know, I will outsource the transport or the delivery system, or I will outsource, I will only take a part-time rent, or I will go into a backyard of my father-in-law or my father or my something and work out of there. It's not able to do that. You need to pay rent. You need to have a Baladia permit. You need to do this. You know, those are the kind of things. I know that a lot of places have created, like in the knowledge com, you can go and get some subsidized rate for a thing, but it's more towards an IT or an office environment. But what happens if you're producing, or you're running a kitchen, or you're running a back house, kind of a craft workshop or something? It's not possible. You cannot register your enterprise by doing that. So I think these are the areas that have been affected, is those ones which have been having a cost, which is non-related or non-productive cost. And the fact that the large enterprises, the corporates or the government, which was basically feeding and were actually providing the subsistence to these small enterprises, they are not going to do that, because for them, this is not now priority. The priority for government and for the large private sector houses is survival. As most of us are saying, if we can survive 2020, that itself is an achievement. Surviving 2021, we look at it when we come to that hurdle.
True.
Currently, everybody is doing nothing but slashing going on. So I think this is what is going to be causing a major thing, that the money flow into the SMEs will be marginalized in a large way, because the very survival of the large corporate houses and the government is questioned at the moment.
Which means, Pankaj, setting anything right would necessarily mean setting the ecosystem right first. And
Correct.
that itself requires a whole series of corrective action, because without that being corrected, nothing else will follow.
So in the ecosystem, first, we need to get the regulatory authority to say that, no, let them work out of home. Let business thrive out of home. There's nothing wrong to kind of produce something at home. And don't expect the small businesses to kind of go and register at the Baladia and register at the for a rental premise or have a car and all that. It's not required. You don't need an electricity permit or a telephone bill to register your office. You can work from home, and there's nothing wrong with it. Encourage people, in fact, to do that.
We have quite a few of these young SMEs who do work from home, but as you rightly say, they have already looked at large borrowings, started with heavy loans.
Yes.
So they've already sort of put in a lot of liabilities before they actually got onto the even keel of building the business. So they front-ended their costs, in a sense. All of them seem to have front-ended the costs. Then perhaps there are a couple of lessons, Pankaj, that worth viewing. You've raised some very interesting points in terms of the constraints, the liabilities, and what's going on. So going forward, what would you advise are the 2 or 3 critical factors, knowing that these are the weaknesses of the system already?
Well, I think the critical factor is that if there are borrowings, now is the time for you to go and upfront go to the banks or to your lenders and say, I need a deferment. I need a furlough in paying off my loans and my interest. I am not asking for more. And if you are asking for more, tell them I want it for the period of the 6 months that I need to survive on. And it's my basic cost of my outgoings, and that I need to cover that. That's it. Do not borrow more than you require. Number one. go be frank and upfront with your bankers, because the bankers have been given an unofficial mandate by the CBO and by the government to help the SMEs.
Okay. Okay.
There is also, please also immediately get in touch with your electricity, water, your utility teams, because they also will give you a 3 to 6 months deferment on your payments. So immediately contact them. This is the first thing we did when we as business houses were addressing the various issues that business per se will face in Oman. We told them that the first thing you need to address is for the SMEs is to defer their outgoings, which are controllable by the government, to say, okay, let's defer it till the end of the year, till after the end of the year.
Many of the institutions, while in spirit are prepared to provide support, in reality, it doesn't seem to be forthcoming.
I've faced this myself with certain landlords. You know, we try and encourage that wherever we spread our businesses into, especially outside of Muscat, we try and encourage local people to lend us their buildings, their infrastructure, their warehouses. 2/3 of them have been extremely supportive in saying, yes, we fully understand. There have been closures, there have been derailment of business, etc. We're happy to let go or give you a 50% discount. But there are certain people who are not ready to listen because they know that, you know, you can't do without them. And they say your business is not suffered. Now, how do you tell them that the business is really down 50%? Or the business is just not there? If the restaurant is not opened, it's not opened, it's just not there. You need to kind of think. So I think you need to, we as large corporates need to assist the SMEs, to handhold them, to mentor them. And even if it means going and negotiating on their behalf, I think this is the time that we need to come together. We may not be able to give them kind of cash and financial assistance to straight away, but the least we could do is to go with them and work with their stakeholders and saying, you know, let's help you defer your ongoing expenses at least for a period of 6 months.
Which means an interesting possibility is to build some kind of sort of a network with large corporates who in turn
absolutely
assist in influencing some of the landlords
yes.
to work along with us.
Yes, correct. In fact, if it means that I have a large warehouse which is partially utilized, I'll be happy to let them come in and use it till the meantime, you know. And I think this is where the cluster and the ecosystem comes in.
Yeah.
Nauzer.
Yes, you're right. Because I think one of the problems, Pankaj, is the ecosystem itself is not reviewing what needs to be done. I think everybody is preoccupied with the impact and how to survive, as you mentioned, right? So I think since preoccupation is one of survival, how do you look outside and sort of find a way to assist somebody else? So I think the players in the ecosystem also need to give a little time to look at this small young SME who is hurting very badly, has a lot of...
Absolutely.
Pankaj, just going a little ahead on the subject, a lot of young people who are on the threshold of looking at new business startups are now questioning whether this is the right thing to do. I think the environment is...
They will.
So, what would you suggest, if at all, that needs to be done so that this momentum that was created over the last 10 years is not lost?
So I think it's very important that people who have those dreams or have realized, have worked towards building the so-called vision and wanting to realize that vision, they will have to take a 6 months little break. They need to kind of hold on for another 6 months. If they can't, let them come into a part-time kind of a work where they can put in 4 hours somewhere in some industry, learn. I think this is where we will come in and saying, okay, how many young potential budding entrepreneurs can you hire for the time being for the 6 months at a part-time to work anywhere within the organization, whether it's creative, whether it's hospitality, or whether it's in finance or accounting. So let them come in and work. They need to appreciate that the current ecosystem is not going to let them survive or start at this moment. It's a wrong timing. It's a matter of timing, but not to lose heart. We as large corporates will be happy to kind of give them some sort of a subsistence in terms of work that they will do for us, and we work from there. And I think this is something that we need to share.
Who are the other partners or stakeholders of the ecosystem who could also participate? Because what you're saying is,
I think Nauzer, you must appreciate something. We went and built this large steel cluster in Sohar, or an aluminium mega mill in Sohar. We put up a large petrochemical complex in Sohar. How many SMEs, apart from cleaning services and facility management companies, have actually benefited from that cluster? It's time that we look at these clusters, whether it's a PDO or it's a Shell or it's a bank. Today, you look at the main banks or the Omantels of the world, or you look at the large companies, the real icons of Oman. If you look at those icons of Oman, they need to have some sort of a plan to kind of say, okay, we will make sure we outsource X amount of our non-core business to small, efficient SMEs, or we cultivate those SMEs, or you work with them where we make them efficient to give us a cost beneficial win-win proposition in terms of looking after. Like, why am I running a call center? Because I don't find a call center efficient enough and reliable enough outside. Why am I running my own delivery system? Because I don't find a delivery system which is reliable enough, HSE wise, who can deliver my products as and when I want my products to be delivered. Why am I running a small van system? Why am I having vans to go and deliver things, etc.? I think that opportunities are there. The question is, how can we dovetail this with the large players? And I think what we need is basically an agency who's there to say, okay, these are the various options available. Can we bring these together with various, we need to bring them into the limelight to these large houses to say, how can you help these small SMEs?
I think, Pankaj, you're absolutely right. This goes back to your earlier point that we don't have clusters, we don't have ancillary industries which can service these kind of major industries. I think the developed world,
absolutely,
the large industries, even bicycle industry in India, which make millions of cycles, it's now purely an assembly plant. It's this SME who delivers everything to the assembly plant.
Absolutely.
So, which by definition requires some introspection in restructuring industry in Oman. You have Dukum being built as a huge industrial center. You have Sohar as a big industrial center, but there are no ancillary capabilities being developed in order for the SME to participate.
Instead of saying that when you bring in a large multinational and you tell them, okay, I want you to be at least in 5 years, you have to be 35% Omanization. This multinational, for all you know, may hire 500 people at peak. And at 35%, you're talking about 175 young Omanis will come and work, and at minimum wages, and then be trained, and then we go up to 500, 600, 700 riyals at peak. You've only created 175 workplaces.
Yeah.
Where is the ancillary industry, or where is the SME growth that is going to come around this large mega project? I think instead of focusing on the 35% Omanization at the end of year 5, why can't you say that you must encourage at least 10 SMEs to grow, who grow out of your thing? This will be creating a ecosystem.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Pankaj, what happens here is that...
So today we produce aluminium, and all our aluminium ingots are 100% exported in ingot form.
True. There is no ancillary downline.
And the ancillary industry is where the value addition comes in. where the maximum profits retained.
Yes. I think that's an extremely valuable point, Pankaj. Getting government and getting industry to look at participating as part of their FDI, to have a proportion of their investment into an SME ancillary structure as opposed to the conventional Omanization structure. It might also blend both.
Yes, I think this is more crucial. Absolutely. I think businesses will have to consider saying, how many young businesses have you actually helped mushroom?
Yes.
That is the true yardstick on which you should measure the performance of or the contribution of these large houses.
And I think, Pankaj, by definition, what happens is that the SME is Omani. So to an extent, you meet your Omani goals also, but with a significant value add.
Yes, so you just change the so-called yardstick in which you measure your Omanization or your value addition to the contribution of the country.
How can one go about doing this?
We have to engage with the MOCIs and the Ministry of Manpowers of the world, and tell them to adapt to this whole system and creating the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think this is one part of what I was wanting to discuss with you, and I think that's a brilliant way of going forward. This brings us to the point that at this juncture, the ecosystem itself, some introspection, some correction is required. The old ecosystem continues, it will not work in its current form. Yeah, so I think going forward, you've raised two very critical issues. What else would you think are necessary for change? I think the FDI linked to ancillary development stroke SME is a very interesting way to go forward. What else would you suggest?
Absolutely.
Possible areas where this kind of value add can take place?
So we need to identify what are the prospects, or what can Oman offer. What is Oman's key strengths in terms of whether it's mining, whether it is fisheries, whether it's tourism, whether it's transport logistics, and whether it's manufacturing. The big 5 pillars that were identified in the 2040, in the 2040 Vision Mission, the Tanfeed program. Within this 5 pillars or clusters, what is it that we have currently? We need to identify what exists and what will be built in terms of infrastructure over the next 5 years. And where can the ancillaries come in and participate? I believe the biggest ecosystem that will proliferate is the tourism cluster, the travel, trade, tourism, hospitality, restaurants, cafes, catering, the whole thing. We know it. Globally, it is the largest employer in the world. 1 in 7 people in the world are employed in the travel and tourism business. So, directly and indirectly. So we need to really exploit and explore this possibility. So we need to really identify what are these little SMEs, what can they do? Now, a lot of SMEs go into things that I see so-and-so in Australia or in America do this, so I want to do it. But if there is no market for it over here, you're not really, the square clog is not going into the round circle.
Yes.
So, there's a mismatch of what is required and what is being produced, or what has been created.
In our experience, Pankaj, what seems to be happening, at least historically for the past, as you rightly say, the initiative of getting into an industry is left entirely to the processes of the entrepreneur stroke SME. He decides to do something. There is no relationship from the industry side saying that we have gaps in services, so can we look at people who can come into this? A very simple example is construction, for example, is a huge industry and the largest industry by definition. But we have SMEs in all of them wanting to do the same thing. So we suddenly land up with 50 of them doing gypsum ceilings without really understanding whether there's capacity. And then they compete among themselves. So somewhere along the line, we don't seem to have the right interface between the industry needs and what SME should be doing. There's a gap over here. How does one?
I think
Yeah.
I think what we need to do is what happens typically is that if we could have some sort of a park or a design center or somewhere where all the SMEs related to the so-called construction, infrastructure, building industry and the real estate industry are parked and are contained over there. And this becomes a so-called design center, which exhibits everything to do with construction, real estate, development. Similarly, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying for that extent, you have the Research Council, the Innovation Park, various things have been already put into place in some form. I'm not sure whether they really deliver.
Yeah, but I think this needs to, you can't have Wadi Kabir or Hamriya or Rui being the so-called building material hub, and you suddenly have the small SMEs who want to feed into that hub are placed in Rusail.
Okay, yeah, understood.
So what you need to do is to create a hub for these SMEs in the areas where the building material business exists. So if Mawala is going to be the new hub for the growing town of Muscat going forward outside, then they need to be in an area where this whole industry is flourishing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't tell them that you will work from 7 to 3. The whole industry works at a very late hours. They work until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, because during the day they do construction. Engineers come home in the evening, and then they're looking around for materials and they're looking around for services. So I think you need to kind of connect in the right way, rather than being completely, offshoot, completely disconnected. I think right now there is no connect between the industry and the innovators.
By that logic, Pankaj, then obviously going forward, one of the opportunities is to create business clusters, construction business clusters or whatever.
Yes. So Khazain,
creating development of their own.
Khazain, correct. So we need to have a large, so-called a cluster where geographically they are all in one area. And there is where we will see the small SMEs kind of flourishing, because they will either work with or create their own little hub.
And no, in doing so, taking an example from one of the Indian clusters in Ludhiana and places where they've got lock making and
exactly,
the cluster then becomes self-sufficient. The cluster
absolutely,
it builds its own ecosystem. Its credit lines, banking, support,
correct,
material all start surviving.
Exactly.
How does one then actually try and get a cluster going? Is it possible to work with an industry to get a cluster going?
One thing we need to do is there are two things. One, the ecosystem of, let's say if we're looking at, let's take for example the construction, the building material industry. If we are taking this construction and the building material industry, if we want this industry to grow and we want the SMEs to come in and feed into this industry or feed out of that industry, we need to make sure that this industry, first of all, mechanizes. The current industry of the construction and building material trade is so labor intensive. I mean, I would say we are as bad as the underdeveloped or the undeveloped world in terms of our construction methodologies. And by virtue of this, we are not ready to invest in mechanization in order to reduce the power. And in mechanization will come machine operators, building offsite, having little workshops to assemble things elsewhere, and then only going and doing a screwdriver and a fit out on site. Currently, everything gets worked on site. The woodwork is done on site, the aluminum framing is done on site, the waterproofing is done on site. Nothing comes pre-prepared. So we need to do a little understanding. We need to have building standards in place. We don't have building standards in place. We don't have so-called environmental standards in place in terms of saying the thermal insulation needs to be there in the buildings. We want to do it. We all are aware of it, but we're not implementing it. And we have too many stakeholders, each one trying to say, yes, it needs to be done, but nobody wants to take the initiative. Is it the municipality? Is it the Ministry of Housing? Is the Supreme Council of Planning? Who needs to do it? So somebody needs to take hand of it and say, let's build this, because then the ecosystem creates, you're creating another ecosystem saying, this is the new technology, this is the new hub.
Is it possible then theoretically or hypothetically to get industry leaders together and let them develop something on their own? Do we need government?
Absolutely. Nauzer, this has been discussed by the so-called the new construction so-called
association.
One of the associations. Yes, the association, the Contractors Association, and various other builders association, whichever was there. That was one of the mandate given to them, that you will come up with this new technology or this new standards, building standards. The Baladia was supposed to do them. I believe now it is in the hand of the Supreme Council of Planning under them to say that come up with the new building standards, which will help and nourish and so-called flourish the SME industry.
Yes, and I think if it's possible to do it now, when you're at the lowest ebb in terms of economic capability, coming out of this with a
well, you're going to lose so you're losing a lot of manpower in any case. They're going back home. A lot of expatriate manpower who are without a job, freelancers, they're actually taking the asylum flights and going back home.
Yes.
It could really be when the industry is actually coming down to, I wouldn't say a grinding halt, but to a low ebb. It's probably the right time to come and say that let's set a building, at least start the process of setting the building standards.
Yes.
At least start the process of mechanizing some of the so-called, saying that you cannot do these things on site. You cannot have an accommodation for labor on site. Where else in the world do you see people putting up ramshackle, really hutments on a site within a residential area where people are living on the same construction site and cooking and cleaning and bathing?
Yeah. No, but I think that's very valuable, Pankaj. What you're saying is so right. If we could get some initiatives going at this difficult time, you'll probably come off very positively at the end of a year when all these other things can
absolutely
be taken care of. I have just a couple of small other issues. One was just going back, you were talking about young entrepreneurs who need to get on board. We probably need to buy time for about 6 to 8 months till this difficult period goes.
They should. It's not the right time to start. I mean, it's like saying that I'd like to go sailing in the monsoon. You don't do that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Other than this, is there any other thoughts that come to mind to keep them motivated? One suggestion you had was to talk about part-time work. Industry could offer people to work part-time. Anything else comes to mind?
No, sir. How many SMEs are there today? I mean, literally the young first-timers who have actually just ventured out and have had to face this crazy storm. I'm just saying that I think at this point in time, we need to identify with them. And I think this is the time where the big boys need to kind of say that, apart from the own back of the house improvements and cleaning up that we're doing in our own house, we also need to take care of that little neighbor or the little shopkeeper at the end of the street who is facing even greater problems than we are.
Yeah.
And I think there has to be a complete mindset change amongst the large corporates to say, let's go and look after the small ones as well.
So maybe
and I think we need to start a mentoring and monitoring program for that.
I think it's a wonderful idea. But I think also perhaps there's some way of, I'm not sure how to do this, but maybe if all large organizations could find job sort of capability, and if there's some centralized recruitment package where people could apply and then get jobs, some way to get this connectivity going would be a good thing to do at this stage. So all these young
there is a manpower registry that has started, and I think that needs to activate itself. This is under the Ministry of, we used to be part of the Ministry of Manpower, but now it's a parallel organization, but still very much controlled by the Ministry of Manpower. You can probably catch up with them and say, how can we do this? And how can they advertise, and how can they kind of say capabilities being, shown?
Pankaj, this is very, very nice. Thank you. I've taken a lot of your time.
Very happy to contribute.
Thank you very much, Pankaj.
Anytime.
Thank you so very much. This is wonderful and
thank you, Nauzer.
amazing.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.